Welcome back to Boom and Bust. We have our panel with us today, the Honourable Joe Oliver, the Honourable Gary Marr, and Sandra Pupatello in Ontario. Gary Marr, your chance to talk a little bit about what you're expecting in the federal budget April 16th, and maybe marry that with, there was an Alberta budget just a few days ago, so maybe your initial thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, I'll be short on the federal budget. I mean, I agree a lot with what Joe and Sandra said on the subject. And I'll only make this one quote, a quote that I've given many times, and that is to quote the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, who says, "The economic horse is what pulls the cart for the social programs that we all want and need to pay for." And what I want to see, that I don't think I'm going to see in the April budget by the federal government tabled by the Minister of Finance, is an economic growth strategy. And the idea that we have to grow the pie in order to distribute the pieces of pie, I think, is very sensible, one that's understood by many governments, including Premier Kinew of Manitoba, and one which seems to be lost upon the current federal government. Now, on the Alberta budget, I mean, it was tabled last Thursday, and it's pretty close to a razor's edge of whether it goes into deficit or a small surplus, and that's because the revenues of Alberta are so dependent upon the energy sector. About 20% of Alberta's GDP, representing about 25% of the revenues of the government of Alberta, rely upon the price of oil and gas. And so today, the price of West Texas Intermediate, the benchmark, is $80 a barrel. What the province needs in order for its budget to break even is roughly $72 a barrel. What they budgeted for is $74 a barrel. But if you look at analysts, it ranges anywhere from 65 to 80. So it's very difficult to tell what the revenues from oil are going to be. We have a pretty good sense that natural gas prices are really low, and so that's going to be a drag on the revenues for the GOA. There was much made of a promise during the election that there would be a tax cut, but I don't think Albertans, Canadians in general, I don't think they're as concerned about not keeping an election promise as the process by which governments understand that priorities change over time, as long as they can be transparent about why there isn't a tax cut or why it's going to be delayed. Because we need to increase our budgets in healthcare and education. I think that's a message that was very well delivered by both the Premier and the Minister of Finance as they're out this week, selling the budget throughout the entire province. I think the response to it by Albertans has generally been pretty good.
Okay.
But it's a very different circumstance than, say, in 2022, when the price of oil was at $120 a barrel. I don't think it's going up there anytime soon. And so, so the long and the short of it, it's a budget that's close to being balanced, and it could tip slightly one way or the other, depending on what the price of oil does.
Joe Oliver, what's your sense of the Alberta budget?
Well, I don't have all the details, but I think it's constructive that they're aiming for a balanced budget. This will be, I think, the fourth or fifth in a row. They've got less debt per GDP in relation to their economy than any other province, and so they're not. We're not into the kind of profligacy that I must say her predecessors of both parties were engaged in. I mean, the idea that Alberta should be in a deficit position during a period of economic growth was totally inappropriate and quite sort of shocking. Well, we've got a different kind of a government now, a government that understands fiscal prudence. I wish her counterparts around the country, and particularly in Ottawa, had a sense of that. But it means that Alberta is going to continue to show the rest of the country what sound economic policy can result in.
Sandra, you got 30 seconds before the break. Any thoughts
Sure.
on
Well,
this?
I guess, yeah, just very quickly, the stories that have come out of Alberta around healthcare and the people that are waiting for care, the
Right.
lineups in ERs. I mean, this is perennial. It's across the country. It's not just Alberta, but for a very wealthy province, which they are, it's difficult that a 4% or 4.4% increase in healthcare in their budget likely isn't going to make a big dent because the demands of the wage increases across the board, not just in the public sector, but private as well,